to Zelda's Peaches and Biscuits podcast. I'm Alaina Doughton. I'm the executive director of the Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald Museum, and I'm joined today with
Maura Martello. I'm a docent here at the museum. I'm a Zelda fan, and I'm a Zelda researcher.
So welcome. Today's podcast, we're going to discuss Lanier High School, Zelda's high school. Also the high school, I think people should know, or school of Hank Williams Sr., not Junior. I think Junior went to the other high Lanier. But so we're going to discuss Lanier High School and what it was like. Now, we've both had a tour, so I think maybe we should start with our impression of the school today. Today it's known as Baldwin Arts Magnet. I think in both Zelda and probably Hank's life, I don't know if Hank went there as a middle school. I think he studied at that school as Baldwin.
Oh, really?
I think so. My grandmother went to, because you went Sayre, Baldwin, Lanier.
Well, maybe we should explain that a new Sidney Lanier High School was built in 1929, which is different from the one that Zelda Fitzgerald went to.
Yes, but both Hank Williams, and the reason I know is my grandmother, she went to school with Hank Williams. My grandmother went to Sayre Street School, then to Baldwin, and then to the new Lanier High School.
Okay.
And so I think both Zelda went to the Sayre Street School and then to Lanier High School, which is now the Baldwin. The actual building. And this building is somewhat in downtown Montgomery. It is next to where the Montgomery Library is, and that during Zelda's lifetime was the Montgomery Museum of Fine Art, where she would have exhibited.
Yes.
So if you're in Montgomery, please don't go bother the children, but you can go. It's a really beautiful building. It's a Lockwood building.
Yes.
We'll discuss that in a minute. And then the library is where the original Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts was, and this is where she exhibited her paintings. So this area of Montgomery is still, I think, very important to her life, but in terms of, Zelda and Fitzgerald scholarship.
I think across the street from what we call today the Julia Hampton Morgan Library was Girls High, and that was the original Museum of Fine Arts. It was in a schoolroom.
Well, I think there was a couple places, because and we haven't discussed it yet, but it was, when I was a child, it was known as the Tumbling Waters Fountain Museum, and it's that really beautiful building on South Perry Street. I think like the water board's in it now, and that was originally the Carnegie Library, and that is where some of the early exhibition shows were. So I know, again, my grandmother said all the best books were in the basement, but it was really creepy.
It's a Carnegie Library. It still stands.
Yeah, it still stands. It's a really beautiful building. Before the shutdown, I went, and they let me take pictures over there too. But we know before there was a Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, they, like Marie Bankhead Owen, they would have these exhibitions at the Carnegie Library. When you go, you can see they've kind of partitioned off these big rooms. So it was a big, open, beautiful building. So I know that she had exhibitions there, and what would be, was the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. But going back to Lanier High School, what is your impression of it today? We both had different tours, but we've both seen it within the last few months.
Well, it is a Frank Lockwood building, so immediately you're going to get something unusual and quite beautiful, and it is. The interior, there's so much to talk about. I think maybe we could talk about it together, our joint impressions of it. It has many, what I would call arts and crafts.
Yeah. It's
motifs.
kind of almost like a late, I always say it wrong, that kind of a Beaux Arts. It is very beautiful. Quite a bit of architectural molding. When you enter, there's really beautiful staircase, which they've painted a kind of green, which is kind of what a green patina. If you think like the Statue of Liberty, kind of,
right, like copper when it oxidizes.
So it has that green patina.
It's not an institutional green, which is really ugly. It's quite beautiful.
And when I toured it, we both we should give our thanks to
Jeanette Wright.
Yes, she is the current
She's the
principal,
I believe. Yes.
And she was talking about how they selected the colors, and today they don't. We're so used to thinking of that time period monochromatically because of obviously black and white photos, and there's different greens and pinks and whatnot. And when you think about Art Deco, now this building would have been opened in 1910.
Yeah.
That the colors then were a lot brighter than we think. If you, for example, we know Scott Fitzgerald names the Jazz Age from Tales of the Jazz Age. Well, one of the historic colors, and it was a pink in this house, is Jazz Age pink, and it's a very vibrant pink. It's not like a Pepto pink. We have one. We know that the pink was upstairs in this house, and we have one right now. What's kind of Scotty's gallery is in the pink, but you had really vibrant colors, which are kind of somewhat lost to history. So it's nice when you go into that school. It looks serious, but then it has this very vibrant color.
Do you think we could put up one of these photos?
Yeah, we have a variety of photos, and I will have them go to as always, our show pages. We'll have some on Instagram, and you'll see the green.
So beautiful. I'm looking at a photograph right now. It's just stunning.
And they also have some purple too, but
it's an, I guess I would assume it's iron. It's an iron staircase. It's very ornamental.
It's probably at that time a molded cast iron. Mm-hmm. That I don't think I've asked her. When I went, they were having some kind of tryouts, so she just she showed me around, but I was trying to stay out of the way and take various pictures. But there are these really beautiful. It looks like it's kind of stately, but it has the decorative qualities of kind of a late Beaux Arts. So it's very beautiful. There's some really beautiful architectural molding. The stairs you're talking about have a nice kind of pre-deco. And when we think of these in terms of black and white photos, the fact that you've added green and pink or this kind of almost teal type green.
Yeah.
Those colors seems more childlike or whimsical. They don't fit our conception, but this is what it looked like. And if you really want to know what particularly Art Deco looks like, think of South Beach. It's just all this color, and it's often garish and it's often a little tacky.
It's great.
Yeah.
I love it.
So that's kind of the gap between the way we perceive this time period. I think when I was walking around, I would have loved to have gone to school at that school.
Yeah, there's nothing really. It is institutional, but it has some wonderful. For instance, it has two fireplaces. One in what is now the principal's office.
Yeah, the principal's office is gorgeous.
Yeah, and one in the library.
Yeah.
And I have some photographs. I think one of them is terracotta. It's brick and terracotta.
Yeah, it's a big arched.
With an inset in which I guess Jeanette has placed some trophies.
And a bust of Shakespeare.
And a bust of Shakespeare.
It has very high. I think the only thing that's really probably changed is that they've dropped some of the ceilings, because I'm sure they had very high they had high ceilings back then. And again, that was because of the heat. Then there's also some really lovely plaster artworks.
Yes,
there's one particularly in the library.
Yes, it looks like it's either Grecian or Roman, and
I think it's I'll try to see if I can get it. I think it's like it's a frieze, basically.
Yes,
yeah.
It's kind of faux marble, but you think it's plaster?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she told me it was plaster because she said they had a workman and he tried to pop one of the heads off.
Yeah, and I think he succeeded.
Yeah, he did. He took one of the heads.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, jeez. But it's just it's a beautiful building. And the third thing is that there's two other things, particularly for Zelda fans. And if as we found out recently this week, there are a lot of Zelda and Hank Williams fans.
And they're coming to town.
Yeah, this last week we had two separate, one couple stayed with us in the Airbnb, and then we had two more come to the museum, and they came because they were both Hank and Zelda fans. Or the husband was a Hank fan, the wife was a Zelda fan. So the fact that they both went to the same school and performed on the same stage.
And we still have the auditorium.
The auditorium is beautiful. Pre-COVID, we were hoping to maybe do something, maybe once this all passes, we can still maybe do something, because it's a beautiful auditorium. I think seats almost 450. She told me something like that. Has a balcony, very beautiful proscenium. And to think that Zelda performed there, that Hank Williams performed there. I mean, that's the thing we were talking before. You don't really realize growing up here and then coming back. You have Scott and Zelda. You have Hank Williams. You have Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. and all the members of, these are the figureheads of the civil rights movement. And they changed the world.
Yeah.
And they were here. Yeah. We know in 1938, definitely 1940 till Zelda's death, you had Zelda, Hank Williams, and Rosa Parks all here in Montgomery. All would have unquestionably been on Dexter Avenue.
They would have passed each other.
They were eating at Chris's Hot Dogs. Come visit, eat at Chris's Hot Dogs. We know that Zelda is shopping at Montgomery Fair.
Which is where Rosa
Parks. Yeah. So, but you just think, you just read Dickens and then read Scott Fitzgerald or Hemingway, and you see that we still live in the standard that they set in terms of literature. And I think Zelda does own a part of that. I don't think Scott plagiarized her like a lot of people want to think. But Scott and Zelda are one of the first modern celebrity couples, and I think she's a great contribution to that. So they, in large part, change our literary history. Hank Williams undeniably changed the face of modern music, particularly lyrically. If you think about all the major rock bands that all refer to him, like the Rolling Stones, and even I think to a certain degree, I think Paul McCartney had said, because you think he was one of the first lyricists that says, "I'm so lonely I could cry." I don't know. And then musically, the standard he sets for country music, but also lyrically. And then the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement, what it means not only to our country, but what it's meant globally. Yeah. And you just think that all happened kind of on one street, or in this with 2 miles of here. And then you have two of those figures going to the same school. So kind of in retrospect, you just think the greatness that kind of comes out of that one school.
I wonder why. I wonder what's in the water in Montgomery that creates all this
friction. I don't know. So I thought we could kind of talk about what the building was like. And in our previous podcast on her elementary school, we had we were talking about how many children were crammed into that school. Yeah,
like are we talking about the Sayre Street?
Yeah, school? So that, remember, it's like, the 4 rooms downstairs, there's 50 kids. She shows up and she's like, "No, thank you," and goes home. That they kind of have, they open the window, and it just sounded terrible, quite frankly. I mean, it's a beautiful building.
Beautiful building, yeah.
But 50 kids, just the poor teacher trying to manage all those little kids. But what surprised me is that that school, I don't know what its enrollment is today. It is a magnet. But in Zelda's day, that school had 800 students. It's accommodated, and you're like, well, God,
and it doesn't seem like a big school to me.
I think it's deceptive when because it's
Street School, which looks huge on, sort of set on that.
Yeah, I think it's
hill.
Because there's buildings around it. I would say that if I had to guess, having been inside, I'd say that, the Lanier's, or it's now Baldwin, it's like 3 stories though.
Yeah.
So, and the rooms.
Maybe you're right. Maybe it is dwarfed a bit by the
And
buildings around it.
I think it's much deeper too, because you can't get, like Sarah Street School, you can physically walk all the way around the building. Because Baldwin, it's set back, it's in that downtown area, and they even mention in the newspaper articles. So Marie Bankhead Owen, and we'll link to this, or we'll post it on the show pages. She does a full 2 pages, January 1st, 1911, teaching Montgomery boys and girls manual arts. Lasting good is being done at Sidney Lanier High School by modern methods of instruction. And we'll post these pictures because it shows the school, it names the faculty. What I thought was interesting is they have the separation of the girls' cooking class and then the boys' manual training class. And then they show the auditorium. And the auditorium, I mean, it looks even more impressive there because they have beautiful curtains.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful curved proscenium. And then you see the faculty. And again, the faculty at these schools today, you would be glad to have at a university. You know, the level of education it took to be a high school teacher. I mean, these people are PhDs and whatnot. And I think...
Yeah, they took education seriously in those days.
Yeah, and I don't know what they were paid, but the faculty looks to be about half and half male and female, which you think today how few men are really, particularly under high school, you know, it probably has to do with pay. But I was surprised at how many women, but then they're also talking about a lot of these classes are kind of home ec classes. But they also talk about physical culture. There were...
That's gym today?
I think so, but because they show in the image, they show the girls in kind of... They have on skirts, and it seems to be like midi blouses. And we know from the various things that Zelda she wasn't that concerned about her clothing.
No.
And it's a little, it says girls physical culture class, but it talks about, here, let me find it, my pile of stuff. It says that Mr. G.E. Stock is the director of the physical culture classes, and the gymnasium is a long, ideally planned room for the work of developing the physical being of the pupils. Besides the training through manual exercises, there are all the usual appliances for development: horses for leaping, ladders, dumbbells, bars, and other appliances. So it sounds like kind of gymnastics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, physical culture was indeed gym, and they did have dumbbells, and they had something, I forget what they're called. They're sort of shaped like bowling pins, and kind of wave them over your head.
Well, they're kind of like what today people use for kettlebells.
Okay.
Kind of, yeah. Okay. Well, kettlebells they're a Russian invention. The other thing is it says that in this room, basketball and tennis are played. Also, shower, baths, and dressing rooms adjoin. And when I saw that they had like locker rooms, showers.
Oh, really?
My mind went, I mean, what pranks did Zelda do? That's the one thing when you think about her is you just think, what was she doing?
Well, she used to turn, lights on boys who were going into a local cat house.
Yeah.
She would
throw the headlights on them.
Yeah, like a Klieg light.
Yeah. We call that jack lighting. She was jack lighting them going into the brothel.
And gaslighting them.
Yes. But
God knows what she got up to.
But then I also thought, because it surprised me tennis, because because we've both been there, and I think I was pleasantly surprised because I didn't know about it until visiting, is the gym is on the top floor. It's inside. It's on the 3rd floor, which I find really weird.
Yeah.
But it is now the Zelda.
It's the dance studio.
It's the dance studio.
And it's dedicated to Zelda Fitzgerald.
And it is a sizable gym. I mean, it to this day is not, it doesn't have, I think the reason is that it doesn't have risers so that you could have, like you go and they pull them out and people can sit and watch the game. I imagine they probably had them back in the day. But the other thing is, you think she was a lifelong tennis player. I think that's somewhat missed, is that she played tennis. There's photos of her and Scott playing tennis. There's the one story where she's playing tennis nude.
She played strip tennis.
Strip tennis. I mean, there's a couple of...
Don't we all?
No. And then we know that when she's here, she plays tennis regularly with Noonie. And I've always thought, well, where does she learn these things? And she's clearly
Probably
playing it at school, which I think would be fun. The other is that...
Well, is it possible that at one time Lanier had outdoor gymnastics?
Well, the reason that I don't think is because in here, and what surprised me is when you walk, there's clearly a kind of a basement third floor. So when you walk in, you kind of walk up from the street, and then there's another, but then you could see kids kind of playing, and you realize it's kind of urban because there's no playground, and they're kind of in this, not underground, but as you're on the street level, you look down, and there were kids running around in this kind of courtyard down on the ground. And then it talks about, maybe I didn't print it out, but someone was mentioning that maybe the garden, that there was no playground for them to play on outdoors, and that maybe the city could buy the adjoining property, and that maybe the Women's Garden Club could make a garden for the school. So even at that time, there was not available space around it, because it is a very it's in downtown. It's a very urban setting, which go ahead.
Well, we would have to see what it looked like in 1910 when it was built, if we could find photographic evidence. Obviously, the library or the art museum next to it came much later.
Came after, I think in the 50s or 60s. The other thing is that, I found a story. We'll start like when they introduced the school in September of 1910. It says, complete in every detail, the Sidney Lanier High School will receive almost 800 pupils upon opening of the fall session of the public school system on September 26th. And I thought, wow, they started school late September. We only start in August. For more than a year, the construction of the building has been rushed, and even now there remains 2 unfinished rooms. We'll skip ahead. It says, in addition to the classrooms, there are laboratories, lecture rooms, and ample accommodations for the officers of the school, which we said that principal's office is beautiful. Yeah. A suite of 6 rooms having been set apart for the use of the administration officers, there being 52 rooms in all. That's a big building. The ground floor will be devoted to the industrial branches of study, including woodworking department and several branches of domestic science, as well as a general economical department. The next 2 floors will be devoted to academic work, while on the next floor will be located more laboratories, lecture rooms, and rooms for the teaching of sciences. And then they talk about the complete gymnasium on the top floor, one of the most complete gymnasiums for the use of, I think I cut it off. Then they go on, and I thought, and again, fire is just as recurrent. The fear of fire. Now, this building is not a wooden structure. I think during this time building, you have like a lot of wood frame homes. The Sarah Street School is very heavily brick, and this one is, I don't know.
I'm not really sure what the exterior is.
It looks like maybe faced brick. You know how they would build it, and then they
blocks
of
almost yellow or beige.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's concrete. It might be concrete. I'm not sure. It is very urban. It's interesting what you said. It doesn't look like a high school you would see in a suburban setting. It almost looks like the interior, like a New York City school. If you've ever seen the movie, let's say, Up the Down Staircase, it's a little bit like that, very urban.
Well, here it says, in the Sydney Lanier High School, Mr. Frank Lockwood, the architect, has wrought a building that is beautiful in proportion and design, and that is practical in every arrangement. That is hygienically the last word in science, from the automatic ventilation to the flowing drinking fountains. The rooms are spacious and well lighted, and the demands of the practical and the artistic are equally supplied. As the visitor, this is what interested me, is the quality of art that they chose. Because like you said, and also this building doesn't have that institutional feel to it. It really feels like it's an inspiring building. Yeah. Whereas often, I did some work for my PhD. I had to do a lot of like urban planning, and I've gone blank on the guy's name, but there was this planner who really thought American schools, and I think there's one of the very early TED Talks, and he's just angry that schools look like prisons. And they do. They
That's
look
why
like
kids
these
think of them as prisons.
And they have the fences around them, and they just have this horrific institutional look. And
that's when we get to the ugly color green.
Yeah, and so when you see this school, even though I think it needs a little care, it's an old building. Yeah, it's an old building that they've kind of retrofitted. But when you walked in it felt a bit like an old museum. Yeah. And so then you realize when it opens, it says, as the visitor enters the main hall, there stands on either side of the door the figure in plaster and heroic mold of the Minerva I guess it's Medicea, and of the Venus de Milo. So you have these two plaster Venus figures. I mean, you have Venus de Milo. I'll post these because the Minerva, I think she says Medicea, is actually it's the ancient Greeks rejected a Venus figure because she was nude and sent her to Turkey. And I will think of her name in a minute.
Are they still there? I don't. Okay.
Because that's what I was could you imagine in a school today a life-size plaster of the Venus de Milo and I can't believe, because the other one, she's nude and she's kind of leaning forward and she's kind of covering herself. It's clearly a nude. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe I'll think of it in a minute. But it was kind of scandalous in ancient Greece because most people don't realize in Greece, women were not nude, men were nude. And then it flips. And when it was, I think carved by Praxiteles. Anyway, when it was carved, the Greeks rejected it, and it was then shipped to
Montgomery.
Turkey. No, it was shipped to Turkey. But to have, if you think that Minerva is also the Roman name for Athena. So to have that, or to have a topless woman, basically, that had to be vaguely scandalous.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that we would do it today, particularly for high school. Yeah. I mean, talk about
goofy boys,
and you think goofy
and Zelda,
goofy boys, but I mean, you talking about we're pulling all these statues down, but that's just ripe for dressing up, defacing.
Yeah. Maybe children were better behaved in those days.
No, we know Zelda wasn't. Well, come on. Yeah. I mean, so when I was like, wow, they had these. And it says on either side of the door in heroic mold. So I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting use. Heroic normally it means large. I mean, I don't think they were tiny. Who knows? And then on the walls are a reproduction of Rembrandt's Cloth Merchants or the Syndic of the Drapers, the original of which hangs in the museum at Antwerp. A photo gravure of Burne-Jones's Hope and Abbey's Search for the Holy Grail. And those are very, if you don't know Burne-Jones, they are, I'm really drawing blanks today.
That's all right.
She has really long red hair. It's a really beautiful painting. It's kind of arts and crafts period.
Okay, it's not pre-Raphaelite?
Yeah, no, it is pre-Raphaelite. That's the word.
Oh,
so,
that's the word.
yes. And again, we'll put these on the show pages. But it's, most people recognize it when they see it. She has that very long, wavy, kind of, not pink girl, but very long red hair. It's very pre-Raphaelite. So you have this really beautiful art.
Very inspiring for kids.
Yeah. So when you walk into this high school,
Not like today.
this high school looks like a museum. It has, I would argue, because I was looking if we could maybe use their auditorium. The only thing that auditorium doesn't have, it's kind of a shallow stage, and it doesn't seem to have any wing space. Mm-hmm. But it's more of a presentation style, but it's a beautiful theater.
Oh, yeah.
And so maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, we can do something there in the future. The other thing in talking about the not physical culture is the way that they split boys into basically shop.
Right.
But we're not talking your average like woodworking shop. What really shocked me is when I was reading these 2 pages of what was going on at the school, because that's what I was alluding to before, is we have no idea what the curriculum was at the Sarah Street School. But we have more of an idea of what they were studying here because we have this article, but we also have some of Zelda's literature books from that time period. But in terms of the physical laboratory, it says the physical laboratory is a large, well-lighted room, and although the equipment is not complete, as explained by Mr. McKimmey, who's the teacher of this department, it is adequately appointed for the present experiments. Among other things taught in this shop is how to make an X-ray photograph. They're making it. This is 1911. How unsafe is making X-rays in the basement? I mean, it's technologically on the edge. I mean, it's very, but it's like, we're going to make X-rays in the basement. I mean, maybe there's something
you're missing. Yeah,
but still, possible. I can't.
Or, it's everybody turned into Marie Curie.
Yeah, the principle of electricity explained and applied, and even wireless telegraphy is demonstrated. The work is both theoretical and practical, while not claiming to equip a pupil as does a polytechnic school, still the preparatory groundwork is accomplished thoroughly. And you think for 1911, when this was written,
it's extraordinary.
Yeah, that is extraordinary for a high school. And meanwhile, the girls are upstairs baking.
I wanted to ask you about that because, you and I have often discussed off air how domestic Zelda could be.
Yeah.
And what is she learning? Is she learning the basics that would take her through her entire life in terms of domestic arts?
Well, that's always been a question for me because we know in her latter life she really enjoyed cooking, and we will get to that eventually. Well, that's the thing about being here in Montgomery. We've found people who own, like Scotty gave all this stuff away, and that we found 1 or 2 cookbooks that she had, so we have an indication. But these again is from the 40s. But and we know in the 20s she writes for that very cookbook, a very famous woman, and hers was Ask the Cook What's in the Fridge or whatever, something like that. And basically it's laughing off that she didn't cook. We know that her mother, we know that her mother always had kitchen help or cooks.
Yes, they did have help in the house, and they certainly had a if not a cook, they had somebody who facilitated, did the washing up.
Well, no, but that's what I wonder is if even though someone's cooking, it doesn't. You have a chef and then you have the sous chef and whatnot.
Right, and
we don't know how much Minnie was in the kitchen with them, and if they were assisting her or if they were cooking for her or both.
I have a feeling that Minnie did a lot of the cooking. Also, there's a menu preparation. Minnie came from a very wealthy plantation in Kentucky called Mineral Mount, where where her father served. He was a state senator, and he had many dignitaries come to the house, and he was famous for having this large board of
Yeah,
food.
yeah.
And Minnie got in trouble occasionally with Judge Sayre because she overspent when it came to groceries and cook. So I think she was in the kitchen quite a bit. And we know from Save Me the Walls that Zelda was put to work as a child, bringing dishes out and putting them on the table for supper.
Yeah, so we know that in here, hold on,
I was just wondering what she was forced to learn at school when it came to the domestic arts.
Well, here it says, a few days before the holidays, a visit was made to this department, meaning the home, I'm calling it home ec, was seated before Ms. Glanton, notebook in hand and cookbook in reach. This typing's really bad. In reach that exceptions to the recipes might be noted upon the margins. Each girl looked thoroughly businesslike and very happy. The conviction was borne in upon an observer that homemaking was indeed woman's natural sphere. And we were talking about that earlier, is that not for everybody. I mean, that's the question that when Scott and Zelda's early marriage, that certainly was not the case. I think it's Alexander McCaig's diary where he was talking about how messy their hotel room was. Yeah. And then later there was this, I think, a certain resentment of Scott that she didn't keep house better. But they were they were a celebrity couple. Yes. It's just their lifestyle. I think it's that age-old thing. It's that, what is the division of labor? I mean, we just had not to go political, but at the end of the Supreme Court justice nominations, she was asked, "Who does the laundry in your house?" And I don't even remember her answer, but she kind of laughed. And you just think, I know that the fact that we're still asking that question, and I think the question was probably, I hope, asked tongue in cheek, but you're like, what?
That is very strange.
But they were, I think, because people, that's the question a woman still has to, I think, face, is that all politics aside, a woman has reached, maybe being confirmed, she does have children. She's, by all accounts, happily married, has children, and they're asking her who does the laundry. Yeah. And I thought probably the nanny. I mean, they have, where they have somebody do it, because that's, if you were a person of certain means then, we know that Scotty had a nanny until she went to boarding school. And she had a nanny in this house. We know they had at least a husband and wife worked for them here as well.
Yeah, and I think that there was a bit of conflict between the Fitzgeralds about the nanny. Fitzgerald hired the nanny. Zelda had very little say in this, and she would occasionally rebel against this. I think she wanted to be closer to her daughter, and when her daughter was a child. Yeah. But Scott kind of wanted her to come out at night. Yeah. So you had to have a nanny in the house because they would go out and they wouldn't get home until 4 a.m.
The one thing I think in his, defense is that the two secretaries and the one biography I highly recommend is Frances Kroll's, his final secretary. But Mrs. Owens in Baltimore, when they leave this house and move to Baltimore, there's two different accounts. I think Andrew Turnbull, and I think Andrew Turnbull for me is the best Scott Fitzgerald biography. Yeah. And if you don't know, Andrew Turnbull was Scotty's age, was their neighbor, and Scott kind of took him under his wing. Anyway, he goes on to write the biographies of Scott.
I think it's the first one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's beautifully written, but I think that, because I'm an aunt of 7 nephews as well, and how people treat children and how you treat a child on your worst day, I think is really illuminating. And the fact that Scott, if you think when they go from here to Baltimore, he and Zelda are probably their lowest for both. They're both very sick. They're under great financial pressure. And I think they're probably their lowest in their lives when they're in Baltimore. And then you think about the fighting in the house. And then Andrew Turnbull describes how magnanimous he is toward not only him, but to other kids in the neighborhood and others. And then you hear these crazy stories of, their shenanigans. I don't know that one, but going back, that both Mrs. Owens and Andrew Turnbull mention, I don't know which, but that Scott chose a secretary he would not be attracted to. That was a big, long rambling for that. And so that's what I wonder, why he was really taking it in hand. That in a way, I can see how a woman would want to choose a nanny that she could be friends with, and that a man's like, oh no, we're not having, and you think about how many celebrities end up with the nanny. I mean, I could just start naming. You can just start. I mean, I can think of 3, 4, 5 right off the top of my head. Just in our generation.
Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, I mean, just all of them with the nanny.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he was pragmatic and hired, and I don't think Mrs. Owens, because she's in the romantic egoist. You can see her. She's not an unattractive woman, but she's clearly not his type. So I think he should get some recognition for that pragmatism. So maybe that was why he was choosing the nannies.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I think Zelda, like most people, went through stages in her life, and there's a point where even in Save Me the Waltz, she talks about how all she really wants to do, even after she's a mother, is to watch her legs get brown in the sun, develop a tan. This would change as she got older. She would become more domestic, I think.
Yeah.
But so it's entirely possible that he picked the nannies because she wasn't particularly interested at the time when Scotty needed them.
But then you think...
We don't know.
I also wonder, because we live in such different times, about privacy. Like, how I can't imagine having to walk around my house and having this nanny or this secretary that I don't want there in my house.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why they were always criticized for renting houses that were too big for them. Perhaps
maybe because
that was the reason.
Like in the mother-in-law wing, yeah. Because in this house, when you come visit the Fitzgerald Museum, and please visit,
it's a big house.
It is a very big house, and we, for a variety of reasons, believe that Scotty and her nanny. Most scholars don't realize that there was a nanny when they lived here, and so I'm very convinced that there are these 2 downstairs rooms, and that we know that Scott and Zelda kept separate bedrooms, which had to have been upstairs. And again, we aren't sure
they
which was Scott's, which is Zelda's, but they were definitely upstairs. And there's various descriptions of, again, in the Mayfield papers, where when they visit, Zelda comes down the stairs in this beautiful blue, I think a robe. Yeah. And so she, and we know from letters from Scott and Zelda while living here, they mentioned, I was in your room, why don't you go in my room? So, so that there would have been a kind of privacy if Scotty and her nanny were downstairs.
Well, maybe we've hit on something here. That the reason that they did have these big houses, for a family of 3, was because they had hired help and they wanted their own privacy, and then perhaps they wanted to give privacy to their hired help as well. We know they treated them well. Yeah.
I know that the nanny stayed here. And the nanny here, it's in the paper, and they've spelled it really strange, but it looks like a German name. But I think they said she was French. It's like Gerschweiler or something. Yeah. And then the couple, and I think like Mrs. Owen, there was an African-American couple that worked for them while they were here, but I don't think they lived here. I don't, and I know Mrs. Owens, she when she was interviewed later, she would say, well, I could tell that, like, she would leave in the evening, and then she could tell, because I guess the Fitzgeralds would fight after she would leave. And she says, I could tell what had happened by how they were behaving at breakfast, or the temperature at breakfast, or something like that. So I think that, they had the nanny in the house, but I think they kind of held it together till everyone left. I don't know. Here's one more quick description of the cooking class. It says the tables are on 3 sides of a hollow square covered with white vitrified tile that is impervious to inflammable conditions. A gas stove is given to each group of 2. Beneath the tables are drawers that are divided into 3 compartments. In the first, a saucepan, a saucer, and an egg beater. In the second, salt, pepper shakers, half pint tin cup with measuring ridges, a knife, a fork, 3 spoons, different sizes. And then the third are matches, the pot holder of blue denim. They have denim. And a small scrubbing brush and the dish towels neatly folded. On the stove or beside it, each group is a tea kettle, a pan, a sifter, a mop, and a waste jar. What is the waste jar? Is that for pouring off grease or something?
It could be. It could also be where you put the scraps after you've, cleaned the,
Well, sorry. When I was a Girl Scout, I'm going to mention it. We would have to clean the table. And you would have to scrape everything into this like industrial sized can. We call it a scrape bucket. And it was like you had to clean up your table after eating, and you had to draw these little popsicle sticks, and that was the choice of death, is the scrape bucket.
I would imagine it's something similar.
Yeah.
Potato peelings would have gone into it, carrot peelings.
So waste jar and the scrape bucket. The girls have already learned how to make cake, biscuits, 2 kinds of muffins, stuffed baked apples, white cream sauce for cold meats or vegetables, and for the Christmas lesson candy. So that's not bad. So now we need to know where we're going to do a deep dive and figure out if there are any recipes that we can find from the training at Lanier. Because now I want to know what she learned how to make.
Yeah. And do you know whether she was taught sewing as well? She would have learned that at home as well, but I'm wondering.
I don't know. That was the one thing. Minnie seems to have been a very good seamstress. Yeah. All the Rosalind's accounts talk about how she would sew these beautiful dresses. Mayfield, I think it was at Milford that Zelda, they'd all agree they would only spend $5, and then Zelda shows up, and
showed up in a beautiful dress.
But they were all made by Minnie, and then we know that Sam Lanahan shared with us that in probably not long before her death, she sent a letter asking for Marjorie to get a pattern, and that Minnie was still, she asked her mother to sew something, and that's the red dress. You can see it on our Instagram page. We had a costumer make it, and it's still, very petite. Is I think beautiful, still silhouette in the 40s. So I don't know how much she may have sewn. Her mother seems to have sewn quite a bit. The other thing is most people, it's really after World War II that we have what we call ready wear. You go to the store and buy things pre-bought, because that was. Going back to Rosa Parks, she was a seamstress at Montgomery Fair, that clothes were not entirely ready wear, or that you would buy clothes and that they were fitted, and that it was preferable to make your own clothes than to buy them. Where now is it's complete opposite. We have fast fashion. I think we've lost the idea of department store.
Disposable fashion.
But back then, you made your clothes for and somewhat not economy, but department store clothes were just so expensive too, because they were probably made there, a lot of them. It wasn't like today where they're they're produced and then shipped, and anyway. So I don't know. We'll do some more follow up on the cooking and the sewing, because that's what I've often wondered. Because Scott and I'll have to look. He kind of complains that he didn't like her clothes when they went to New York. Right. And then she gets, is it a patou?
Yes,
Patou?
a suit by Patou or Pateau, however it's pronounced, who, of course, was a great French designer.
Yeah, and again, I think you would have had to have been fitted for that.
Definitely she would have had to have gone.
Except I did find, and when they get to New York, I did find ads for those suits.
Yes.
But again, I think you go in.
Yes, you've shown them to me. And they're lovely.
That you're fitted for them. They're not just something you go and pick off the rack and put on. Particularly a name like that, I don't think you would have been.
Yeah, I would imagine it would be like going to Valentino or Dolce and Gabbana. You would have to be fitted.
One of the last things that I wanted to talk about is, and I thought this was kind of a funny story. So this school opens in September, and two things. Evidently, they had public concerts in that auditorium, which I found very interesting because, again, it's a very beautiful theater. So it becomes an alternative theater space in Montgomery, because I don't know that we had that Montgomery would have had a big theater space. And so it says Life of Instrument. It's been clipped. It says a music producer falls 2 floors and is smashed. Journey was near done. It says over $1,500 worth of mute and unplayed music went into nothingness in one grand smash Saturday afternoon when a handsome grand piano being lifted into the second story of the Sidney Lanier High School dropped from the height of the second story to the concrete pavement below. The remains of what had been a few minutes before had been one of the most beautiful and best-toned pianos in Montgomery. Might have served at the purpose of some art craftsman at work on decorative objects, but the ruins in the aggregate would never again amount to anything as a piano. It's awful lot of flourish.
Oh, my goodness.
Says the piano was the property of the Eilenberg Linder Studio of Music and was a favorite instrument of Harold Bauer, the well-known pianist. It was, when the musical tragedy happened, on the last stage of its journey from the musical studio to the assembly hall for the concert Monday night in which Madame Pasquale is to be the chief performer. And the reason, I won't read the whole thing, we'll do it, is that they wanted to save the stairs, those beautiful stairs that they did not want to. Here, let me see if I can find it. I'll skip ahead. Here it is. The school authorities objected to the workmen carrying the piano up the handsome staircase.
Sounds like Laurel and Hardy short.
Well, there's a reason. It's like all those wedding videos.
The
people
music
pass
box.
out. Yeah. It says the school's authorities objected to the workmen carrying the piano up the handsome staircase, which was only recently completed. And that is a beautiful. And also, those staircases are very wide.
Very, very
So
wide.
when
a lot
you're-
of students going up
So
and down.
when you
I
have
guess.
all the students going up and down, I could easily imagine a young high school Zelda giggling, running up and down, like classmates. That's the thing, is being in some of these spaces, it's very easy, and you don't have to be that imaginative, to imagine her running up and down those stairs.
Oh, yeah.
And they're wide, and they're well lit and beautiful, and just being silly and giggling. I don't know. I mean, hopefully maybe one day we can get some kind of tour and take people to the sites, and maybe we can go there.
I did want to mention Zelda did perform at the in the auditorium in March of 1918. She appeared as War in a war pageant, and she had performed it once, and it was such a great success that they said, you got to bring this back a week or two. And they did. But this time, I guess Zelda did not rehearse, and she went up on her lines the second time. So she's floundering around the stage. Apparently, the word before she went up on her lines was the word interrupted. She was supposed to say interrupted something. And she looks out at the audience and she says, well, I guess I've been permanently interrupted. And she just walks off the stage. And the audience, of course, being Zelda and being very popular, they all laughed and applauded her.
I think that's in the text they put in the newspaper.
It is. It's all there. Yeah. I forget who the director. It was a woman, of course, older woman directing and wrote it.
But I don't know if they put the text in the newspaper because she forgot it. I did. I know in the newspaper articles they did print. We'll find that. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes because I've got it.
But she did. Another thing is she did not graduate. She graduated from Sidney Lanier, but they held it at the Empire Theater, the graduation ceremony. It was not held in the auditorium. I guess there were too many students, maybe.
Well, if you have 800 students, there's going to be about 200 students per class, roughly. Because I think it's 9th through 12th grade then, and then you would have their parents. So yeah.
It's held downtown,
which would have been much larger. The current city auditorium is now where they have like the city. And that's a beautiful building too. It's a city council meetings are held there, and that's also where Hank Williams performs. Yeah. I just find it. I mean, but then after being here at the museum and going to all these sites, and then you think, oh wait, Hank Williams also performed here. We have Zelda and Hank performing on the same stages throughout. I mean, there's at least 2 stages, maybe 3 places that they both performed, which is amazing. And we should mention at Sidney Lanier High School, there is a really lovely, it's a lovely portrait of Hank Williams, but he's a very young boy. He's probably 14, I think, 13, 14. And he looks, I'll say it, a little Alfred E. Newman-ish. But they have this really endearing sign, and this will be on our show pages, and you'll have to forgive me. I did bookmark it. I'm going to try to find it real quick. Here it is. So there's a picture of him, and he looks young, and he's got glasses on, and he's got a lovely little polka dot tie. But it says, and I'm going to have to try to read this picture. It says, one of our nation's greatest singers and songwriters, Hank Williams Sr., attended Baldwin Junior High after his family moved to Montgomery from Georgiana in 1936. This photo was taken when Williams was a 13-year-old student at Baldwin. During his time, Williams charted 11 number 1 singles, and though he died in 1953, the albums he recorded and the songs he wrote have continued to sell in the millions of copies. As you work to achieve your goal in the performing arts, be inspired by the fact that you are following the footsteps of a musical legend when you walk the halls and sit in the classrooms at Baldwin Arts and Academics Magnet School. And so I told Jeanette that we will definitely get her a picture of Zelda to add, because we do have her high school. We have her yearbook. But we also have, and this will be a different episode, one of her classmates' senior girl scrapbooks.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah. So we will also post young Hank, and it's a very cute, it's a very funny photo, I think. The last 2 things that here in the museum that relate to Lanier High School is that we have her inkwell, and that we have a copy of her, I guess, 10th grade English book, Silas Marner.
Even Zelda had to suffer through Silas Marner.
So the other thing that I was thinking is the inkwell. It's a glass. Clearly, they're dipping like a pen, and they didn't have fountain pens. They clearly had pencils. But the thing that I thought about, and I can't remember if it was like Little House on the Prairie or one of those movies, did they dip each, it was always the gag about dipping someone's hair into the inkwell.
Right.
And so just again, I would just imagine what pranks she pulled.
Well, we know she played hooky. She would round up the boys, and they would go to the movies downtown.
Yeah, well,
she got in trouble for that one.
The whole class skip day they went, and we looked up that movie. I'll have to. I don't recall it, but it was kind of funny, the idea that we could. Thank God for newspapers. We could identify what movie was playing that week. So are there any last thoughts on, high school? Or the Lanier, the building?
Unfortunately, it's not open for touring. It's a functioning school.
Yeah.
But you can come down and look at the exterior. I suppose you could give Jeanette a phone call.
Or maybe this is an idea, but maybe we can plan one day when COVID's over. If we have enough interest, we can maybe have a tour organize like a tour of Montgomery, and we can go to these sites. Because I think in upcoming podcasts, we'll begin to start talking about Zelda's high school friends. These are some friends she keeps for life: Eleanor Browder, Livy Hart,
Lucy Goldthwait.
Yeah, and Seal Mae West, but also the Gold Dust twins, because one of the Gold Dust twins, Peyton Mathis, is very tied to Oakwood Cemetery. So we have a lot of sites in Oakwood Cemetery.
Yes, and of course Hank Williams is buried there.
Is buried
very,
there as well.
Very jolly grave. It plays music.
He's got, I swear, it's like it starts from the west, and you can see it fills up as you go east. And his grave is that far east part. Zelda's family are buried in the central part, her parents. And then like William Sayre and some others are buried in the very old. Some of that's from the 1700s. So we'll just wrap up, and I don't know, come visit us.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions or suggestions of future podcasts, please let us know. But until then, stay well, and we hope to see you here. Bye.